We're live there. We're live there. We'll go ahead and admit one. Get this going. And
And that one is my ever supportive husband. So I thank him very much.
well, that's good. That's good. So, welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corner Books and More. The next in our series of May is for Mystery is Connie Johnson Hambley from Massachusetts. And Connie grew up on a dairy farm in New York. She got a law degree and moved to Boston. She wrote for Bloomberg Business Weekly, and Nature magazines. She writes short stories, which are in a bunch of anthologies. She's a two-time winner of the Best English Fiction Literary Award. She's a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime New England. And she has her own series of novels, which we'll get to in a little bit. And she's an accomplished equestrian. Connie, thank you for joining us.
Chris, this is really fun to be here tonight. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, I read on your bio on your website that when you're on the dairy farm in New York, there was an incident at the farm. Is this what got you into writing, especially the particular series that we're going to discuss in a little bit?
Well, a little bit. The incident, as you say, was that an arsonist burned down my family farm.
Wow.
He took exception to something that happened, work-related incidents. And he said, well, I'll show them. And he knew the schedule. He knew what time the cows got milked. He knew the time that they were locked into their stanchions. As you might know, that when cows come in to be milked, they know exactly where to line up. And then there is this collar, in a sense, that clamps around their necks.
Yep.
And the workers come around and lock each cow in. And this man knew exactly when all 200 head were going to be locked in to their stanchions. And that was the time that he chose to take a lighted match and throw it into the hayloft above their heads. And you can only imagine what loose hay does when it's fed, an open flame. So literally it was minutes before the entire hayloft had been engulfed in flames. And it was, a mad rush, as you can imagine, for my father and some of the other employees to run around and release all of these cows. And meanwhile, the skin on their hands is beginning to, the hair is beginning to singe. It's, they're missing eyebrows. Things are happening. And it was my dairy farm, my family's dairy farm is in a small town in New York. And it was there not a lot of fire engines around there. So sadly, the entire farm was lost. It was, a sad event in that regard. But what was interesting about it was that the arsonist confessed. They knew who it was. He had bragged in the past about, I'm going to get them, and he had, let it be known. And so that when the sheriff interviewed him, he confessed to the murder. He's like, yep, I did it, and wrote out a signed confession. And, we thought that it was going to be a slam dunk prosecution. Well, sadly, it was there was an error in the Miranda rights, and we all know the Miranda rights. You had the right to remain silent. Anything you say, you had the right to an attorney. Well, in the zeal to, the small town cops, trying to protect the farmer, in their zeal, they did not follow complete protocol when it came to the Miranda rights, and there was a technicality. And sadly, went to trial, and the man was put up on trial, and sadly he was acquitted. He was acquitted because there was the witness who was there disappeared. He's like, I don't want to get involved in any arson thing, so he took off. And also the error in the Miranda rights meant that this arsonist got free. He went off. And what was interesting, there are two things that are pretty interesting about it. The first was that the assistant district attorney at the time was a family friend. My mom and his wife taught school together in a nearby town of Poughkeepsie, New York. And he was very invested in helping the family come through this crisis. And he was really invested in trying to, find the witness and bring this arsonist, this confessed arsonist, to justice. What's really an interesting side note in history is that that young assistant district attorney's name was a young upstart by the name of G. Gordon Liddy.
Hmm.
So you might remember G. Gordon Liddy as far as Watergate, that he was the only person in the entire Watergate scandal years later, not affiliated with our barn fire, but was the only one that actually served time. But he served time because, God damn it, he wasn't going to give up anything, and he kept his mouth shut, and he was just one of those determined people. But anyway, G. Gordon Liddy was the assistant district attorney who, friend of the family, who tried to, bring the man to justice, and sadly that wasn't the case. But the other part that was interesting was that years later, there was a knock on our back door, and Mom opens up the back door, and there is the arsonist. And he says, and he was kind of swaying, a little under the influence there, knocking on our door, just kind of, you could kind of see the bubbles come out of his mouth, I think. And he said, "Don't you recognize me?" And my mom did, but was like, mm-hmm. And he goes, "I'm the man who burned down your daddy's barn." So, so suffice to say, I often say that it is a testament to my parents' fortitude that they found the depth within them to forgive this sorry man and not but rather than grab a shotgun. I have to say, I really do give them credit in that regard. So you're leaving. That was kind of a long-winded way to get to the crux of your question, which was, how did this event impact my writing? And it did, because something really bad happened to good people. So that, that kind of, gee, that was unusual. But what I found really interesting and compelling was that this arsonist was a beloved, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a member of the community. He didn't look like an arsonist, maybe when he arrived on our doorstep years later, kind of drunk, whatever, maybe then he would have. But he looked like everybody else. And for a young child to kind of see all of this play out, you think, oh, a bad man looks like a bad man. Bad man has, the pork, whatever, the hat or the stubble or whatever it is that makes him look like a bad man. And he didn't look like a bad man, but yet he did something absolutely reprehensible out of a motivation to kind of even the score somehow in this warped way. And I have to say that it wasn't until after I went to law school and, began, a professional career that razor's edge was fascinating. It was fascinating that someone who could look normal, act normal, look like a good guy, could do something reprehensible and be in standard community as an individual, just walk freely and not have, bad guy tattooed on his forehead. I found that was fascinating. And I found the interpretations of every stakeholder on that one incident interesting. So that when I was writing my books, I presented a good person in a bad light and a bad person in a good light, because to me, it is conflict, drives your story. I mean, you'll hear many authors say that. But to me, what makes a fascinating interplay for the reader is for the reader to become actively engaged in trying to figure it out. I mean, that's why mysteries are so compelling, right? Because they want to know who did it. They want to know the puzzles. But for me, I don't write standard mysteries. I write thrillers and suspense. So you kind of know what's going on, but you're not really sure if it's okay. And there's a time element involved too. So anyway, that's a long way of answering your question there, Chris. And saying yes, that the arson did impact my writing, but in a way that you wouldn't think.
Right, right. Well, you can see the book behind and to your left there. The first one, it's a barn on fire, and of course, we'll talk about all that, your book covers and stuff. But so was it just the cows? Were there horses involved too, or
No, it was a dairy farm, and we owned horses at the time, but they were not in the barn at the time. It was only the cows.
was that
So
how you got involved with the horses? Because you had the horses there, you just grew up with horses.
exactly. Yes, I've always, we've had horses in our backyard, so I was always riding, from a young age, whether I could just, throw myself up on the back of a horse and use some baling twine as a bridle and just
Mhm.
ride, or as I became more involved in the horse world, then I did dressage and hunter paces and what's called ring jumping, you want to call it Grand Prix. I never got to the Grand Prix level, so I want to clear that up right away. But the disciplines involved in writing, and I found that when I was writing my books, my character sprang. My character came to life one night, and I knew that she was a world-class equestrian with something to hide. So that was important. That was interesting. World-class equestrian, but can you really hide as a world-class equestrian? Because it's a very small group of people with those skills. It's a very small world. So can you truly hide? And then also the business of international competition is really great for money laundering and running guns. It might look all pretty, but there's opportunity there.
Well, my wife is an avid horse person. She grew up with horses on a small farm in one of the small towns here. Um, and she actually gave up her horse for me because the horse did not like me. I tried, I tried, but yeah, it didn't work. But so yeah, and I tried to take horse lessons too. She worked on a horse stable. Her best friend's mother had that, so she would work over there, and of course, and I would take lessons every once in a while. They're big animals, so I wasn't too comfortable, with them. But yeah, so horses are in her family too. Her great uncle was a jockey, and he did the Kentucky Derby and all those kind of things. And searching her ancestry, we found or somebody found a picture, mailed it to us. Just somebody at an antique store found a picture of him on top of in the winner's circle, but then found an article after that saying that he got the boot because the horse was doped.
Oh,
Like he
just like the new oh
just
God.
in this past Kentucky Derby there, yeah.
Yes, Medina Spirit.
Hmm.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
so we found that pretty interesting. And
Well, that's actually, I'm really glad we're talking about this because each of my three equestrian novels, they are. Let me just clear this up. These are mainstream suspense novels with an equestrian or horse themed through it. So that's very different because there's a genre of book like horse books, and that's kind of like young adult, kind of romancy drama at the barn kind of stuff. And my books aren't that. My books are for that reader's parents, or the edgy older teenager.
right.
But each of my books focuses on an equestrian discipline. So the first one has a hunter pace, and a hunter pace is it's like a cross country course that is timed. So a hunter pace. So that would be the first book. And there's a little bit of thoroughbred racing in that. The second book is definitely steeplechase. Steeplechase over in England at the Aintree Racecourse, and steeplechase really was created in Ireland and England, and they used to race steeple to steeple across the countryside. So that's why it was called a steeplechase. And then the third book circles back to thoroughbred racing, but then focuses on a discipline, therapeutic riding. And what you said about, gee, these horses are big, it wasn't your thing. Well, I worked at a therapeutic riding stable and worked with people with emotional and physical disabilities in equine therapy. And one group of people that I worked with were women who had just been rescued from trafficking. So part of their therapy was to work with these really big horses, really big animals, which has a natural like, ooh, gee, can I really do this? And then by virtue of, I managed the horse to make sure that the horse and the client were safe. So I had nothing to do with the actual therapy, but I could listen to what the dynamic was. And essentially, women from human trafficking have lost all sense of personal power. They've lost a true sense of self. They really have been stripped down. But by working with an animal that is as large as a horse, that they are then able to slowly get command over this horse and slowly but surely gain confidence in themselves. And one thing, what you said too about the horse didn't like you, horses are highly empathic. In fact, they say that horses, they recognize people. So, like they recognize you, but they also can read emotions in our faces. And they are highly empathic animals. So they often register emotions sooner than a person does. So it's really interesting that then when I was just going to say then when you harness the thing, but no pun intended. But when you harness that particular dynamic with a trained therapist who then understands the strengths and weaknesses of, in a sense, both parties, animal, four-legged and two-legged, it really creates an amazing opportunity for breakthrough and growth with these women. So in the third book, The Wake, again, I focused on therapeutic riding, and where I volunteered was a farm called Windrush Farm, and worked with a couple of clients there. And with their permission, I've used their names and in my book, so it was fun for them as well. And proceeds of The Wake, I also donate to Windrush Farm.
So, I have a friend who always does the Kentucky Derby. Um, she watches it up here, but she gets all dressed up with the hat and everything for Derby Day and all that kind of stuff. And they post pictures of the family and stuff like that. Have you ever gone to the Kentucky Derby or done anything
No,
like
I've
that?
never gone to the Kentucky Derby, but I have been to Suffolk Downs race course. And actually, when I was at Suffolk Downs, and I'm, watching the weigh-ins, watching the jockeys, how they manage the horses, etc. And at the end of each race, there was this guy coming around with literally a bucket, and then he'd go around to the horse's mouth and he'd take whatever. And the manager who I was there with, I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, that's called a spit bucket." And every winner of the race, the first win place show, they do this quick spit bucket thing because they want to make sure that a horse has not been drugged or doped or under the influence of anti-inflammatories. So I have to say, at this particular Kentucky Derby, Medina Spirit failed the spit bucket test. So what's interesting about writing a trilogy, in the first book with the charity, the opening is Jim Wyeth. His horse has just won a really big race at Suffolk Downs, and he should be thrilled, but he's terrified. He's like, "Oh my God, I wasn't supposed to win that race. Something's happening," and he's terrified. And what was interesting about writing the trilogy, I was able to circle back to that storyline and mine it for some more details that then became resolved in book 3. So it was interesting to have this one little thread that, you start off saying, oh, well, that's not really going to be my story. I'm going to talk about something way different, or write about something way different. But yet it kept on coming back. It was really interesting. And the more I learned about anti-inflammatories and fixing and doping and spit buckets and whatnot, then I was like, oh man, this is great. For fiction, it's terrible in real life, but
Right,
for
right.
fiction, I was all there.
Yeah, we used to live in San Diego, so we would go to Del Mar every year for the
Oh yeah, I've
races
been to Del
out
Mar.
there. And
Yep.
typically we'd break even, we'd do okay. Yeah, like I said, she's the horse person, but I would go just kind of for the excitement and the day out and stuff, and hopefully win, in most cases lose a little money. But she did one where it was we'd watch before we go place the bets. We'd watch all the horses come out, and she'd point out which ones that she thought. And typically, she would do usually the show. I'd either do to win or to place or something like that. And so I'd go in, come back out. Well, we were watching one, and she's like, "That one right there." I said, "Okay." I said, "To show? No, to win." Now she usually did the minimum $2 bet. Well, she did a whole $5 this time to win. It was
Wow.
like 30 or 40 to 1 odds on this one. Yeah, I know, big spender. but um, but it was like 30 to 40 to 1 odds on this one here, and she was just so confident. So we did it, and it was just once around the track, and it was easily 6, 7, 8 lengths ahead of everybody by the last quarter turn, and maybe 100 yards, if that, from the finish line. All of a sudden, just reared up and dropped on the track. Yeah, and everybody went past, and she lost.
Oh wow. Oh
Yeah,
wow.
and the worst part was they had to bring out a little bobcat with chains and to drag it up onto a flatbed. But yeah, it was pretty awful.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and that horse probably.
Gotta wonder what was going on, what was
Yeah,
happening, and
yeah.
so, anyways, that's my tragedy story. Um, so anyway, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, have you ever been over to Britain to see like the steeplechases over there? And
I have definitely have traveled to Ireland. So the first book takes place pretty much locally, Hamilton, Massachusetts, big horse country, and then Kentucky. So the big horse country in both of those places. And then the second book takes place primarily in Ireland, primarily in the UK, absolutely in the UK. And I hadn't gone to a steeplechase in Ireland, but the just being there, it's really important when an author, creates a setting. Settings really need to be vibrant. They really, and your descriptions of the settings, really need to ring true. But they also need to, evoke feelings. So settings are really, they're like a heavy hitting character in our stories. And what was important about actually going to Ireland was, rather than doing, Google Earth flyovers and, all this different research that I can do online and even talking to people, but what you get from actually going there was how it smelled, what the angle of light was like, what strikes the lilt of the language. How does that impact you? What different phrases do they have with that? So I never went to a steeplechase over there, but I saw enough of the countryside. Their stone walls don't look like our stone walls in New England. Our stone walls in New England, we've got boulders, this big.
right,
A lot of the stone walls over in Ireland are very, very small, small stones, stacked way high. So just that was different. And then how the hedgerows and the fields, you can see it in a picture, but when you see it in real life, you realize that hedgerow is filled with tiny birds and tiny animals,
hmm,
you know? And what little bit, I'm sure your wife will attest to this, that if you're riding along a hedgerow and a rabbit jumps out in front of you, well, that horse isn't going to be calm about that, you know. So little things like that, you know, that you, when you go to a place and you can see those details, it really makes a difference as far as writing your story, because it will create a more visceral and entertaining experience for your reader. You want your reader there. And so going there was absolutely imperative to make that, to breathe, to bring that into life.
So it was the idea for the book came first, and then you went over there to sort of get the details for the idea, or was it you were over there and then the idea of the book came to you?
Well, that's kind of a chicken and egg story
Hmm.
there. But I had written the charity. I had written the charity, and I knew at the end of the charity that the two characters, um, that there was another propulsive event, and the two characters were fleeing, and that was the end of the charity. The charity, you know, the major mystery of the charity was finished and encapsulated, but then there was a last minute inciting event and they left. And I knew right from the beginning that they went to Ireland, so I knew that I had another story. I thought the charity was going to be one book, but then, you know, as I thought about it, this other was fermenting. And then you know, then I wrote, then I went to Ireland, and just being there, I knew I had the goods in order to write the follow on to that. And then the third book, just it, I could write still more stories about these characters, but I really felt like I needed to encapsulate, I needed to bookend it.
Did you, so while you were over there, did you take pictures? Did you take notes of like the scenery and stuff like that, or was it just like all from memory when you wrote it?
Oh,
Did you
we had
write?
tons of pictures, wonderful, wonderful memories. But it's those things that stay with you, like
Mhm.
how it smells, the angle of the light, you know, what do the fields feel like when you walk across them? You know, what is a typical scene? You know, a typical scene, and I wouldn't really have known this, was, you know, off in the distance, I saw a herd of sheep being herded by the shepherd and the border collie. You know, yeah, it would be a border collie that, you know, obeying whistled commands, etc. So that was the kind of stuff that I thought, it was little tiny thing, but yet, you know, it that came into one of the scenes in the third book, which was, you know, watching this, you know, farmer herd their sheep, and it was just, you
Mhm.
know, not part of the propulsion of the story at all. But it was just enough of a texture that was genuine and real that I saw when I was over there.
That's one of the things I love about really well written books is the little details like that are
Mhm.
added in there just to kind of give you a rounded picture. Maybe throw in a little emotion in there too. But if it's just a matter of just telling the story, just the storyline, without those little extras, even if it's just, yeah, they were walking down the street, the man turned, gave a quick wave. That's it, just a few words, but you get an idea of what's going on, and
Right,
um,
right.
so some I read. Oh, I blanked again on the title, but I just recently read a book that takes place, and it deals with the IRA and the North and South, or North Ireland and everything. But anyways, it was narrated. I actually did the audiobook. It was narrated by somebody who obviously was Irish, because you had the accent in there. Did you try to, well, in some books try to write the accent in
Mhm.
there? Did you write the accent in there so
I,
that when I'm reading it, I can get kind
well,
of.
actually, in the first book, I wrote more of the accent, you know, to write it out, you know, kind of misspelling the words and writing the accent. And I have to say that, as I wrote the second book, I did mature a little bit as a writer, and I'm going to say right up front. And then it really, when you're reading it, it's really word choice that goes into the accent. You know, you can say, you know, that someone, you know, spoke with a lilt, So then you know that character, they're always going to have a bit of a rhythm and a song to their word choice with that. And that to me was very fun to bring to life. In the first book, as I said, I more wrote out the accent, and then which is an author choice. Some authors like to do that, and some authors, don't like to do that. I have to say that for me, for my own writing, I decided to not do different spellings, but I would, if there was a word, and I'm trying to think of an example now, if there was a word that was truly unique sounding, I would spell it out correctly, and then have an author tell that said, gee, that sounded a lot like the word of, give the rhyming word to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you, in your first book, when you use Hamilton, Mass as an actual place, how did you make it so that did you make it so people could recognize it who lived around in that area, or were you also worried about not making it, take literary license with how you portrayed the town, or did you really try to portray it accurately?
Well, there are some places in Hamilton that are very recognizable, absolutely. But I have to say, as wonderful as the citizens of Hamilton, Massachusetts are, I have a feeling that they would have taken a little bit of an exception if I had eviscerated the victim in their barn. So there are recognizable places, but then the actual farm that I created was fictitious. I mean, they would recognize, Bay Road, or they would recognize Appleton Farms, or they would recognize the description of the places. But then if they actually tried to find that particular farm, they couldn't. They would not be able to. They would not be able to do that for a good reason.
Right.
Yeah. They're wonderful people, but yeah, like I said, nobody wants to find out that somebody's been eviscerated in their barn, even if it was a fiction.
Well, and the same thing with your characters. You mentioned that you did have some of your friends are actually in the book. The other characters, are they based on other people, based on friends? Would they be able to recognize themselves? And
I think again, in the first book, you definitely recognize, some hometown names. You definitely recognize, certain people. I grew up in an Irish home, so my grandmother had a brogue. So as soon as I started to write Irish characters, it was in my ear. I could absolutely hear the brogue. I could hear Jesus, Mary, and Joseph child. And that's a good example. Instead of writing Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, it'd be, Jesus, Jaysus, Mary, Meery, and Joseph, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Joseph. So, that type of thing. I always had that lilt in my ear. And I have to say that, it was the main character is Jessica Wyeth, and as I said, she's a world-class equestrian. She witnesses, and I'm not giving anything away. This all happens in the first 50 pages. She witnesses a brutal, horrible murder. Oh my God, just really, just frightening for a young girl to witness. And she learns that she's being framed for that murder. She learns that, the only way to understand it is that she's being framed, and she realizes that she has to go on the run. So she runs, but the one thing she cannot hide about herself, which I alluded to earlier, is her absolute acumen and skill with horses. And it was that skill and acumen that then brought her to the attention again. And she was an eyewitness to a murder that, if she ever bore witness to that, it would take down an international crime ring. So she had tremendous motivation to stay hidden.
Right,
Plenty motivation to stay hidden. And then the more you learn about her and her family, like, why did that murder happen? What happened to her? What was this car accident early on in the book that killed her mother and father and sister? Why were these things happening to her? And the more you got to know about the family and the motivations, etc., the more you realize that you're going from what do you want to say, a simple murder. You're going from a simple murder into a world of international crime and into the world of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. And one thing I want to say about the IRA before, if we talk about it further, it was in one of my early interviews about the book, about the charity, we talked about the IRA, and I referred to them as a terrorist organization. And my interviewer, she just turned to stone and she said, well, my father was an officer in the IRA, and we prefer to think of them as freedom fighters. So that brings us back to what I said about the arsonist, that here was one person talking about her father as a freedom fighter, but yet another perspective on that same person and that same organization referred to them as a terrorist. And that to me is what makes reading interesting, because I really do, there were passages in all three books that were very empathetic to the IRA, about reunification, about some of the tactics that they use, etc. In fact, more of my research made me highly empathetic to reunification of Ireland and more. So I thought that it was interesting that my sensibilities as an author gravitated and changed right along with my author's sensibility, my character's sensibilities with that. But again, what was important to note was, is this a terrorist organization, or is this, are they truly freedom fighters? Look back on our own history in America. Were in 1776, were they revolutionaries or were they thugs?
Right. So the book I was thinking about Ireland, it's called Northern Spy. It was really, really good, but it had a lot of that in it. So one minute they're being portrayed as terrorists, the next minute the IRA is being portrayed as the freedom fighters, and phenomenal book. Just phenomenal book. And like I said, the audio book, it makes it even that much more because she speaks with an Irish accent. So the narrator does. So yeah. So we had done a series a while ago. Well, actually, since I've been doing this since last summer, we did a couple sets of series. We did Nightmare or Frightmare Before Christmas is what we call this. So we had horror writers a couple weeks before Christmas, kind of in the Krampus sort of feel to it. Then we did Fantasy Romance February, and we did a whole month's worth. And of course, we're doing this. And one thing I noticed that, I know there's subgenres within the main thing of mystery or romance, or, but you can really get into subgenres into all of them. So, mysteries could even, you have a mystery, but yours has terrorism, organized crime, geopolitical warfare, revolutionary versus freedom fighters. So you have another set compared to what the ones that I've had over the past couple of weeks there, and we have cozies coming up over the next one, and one who Death at a Seance, I think, is the name of the book. So she's a psychic medium, but she also wrote a mystery book. So it's opened my eyes to all these different ways of looking at mystery books, as the umbrella term for it. So I do want to get back to all those different things in your books, but I want to go back to your character in the first book. She witnessed a horrific murder. So one thing we talked about in the Frightmare Before Christmas for the horror writer thriller writers was how much was too much as far as the graphicness of those particular scenes. Of course, now horror thriller writers, some may try to push the envelope, some may just hint at it to make it more um, spooky versus just graphic. I have a friend who's a writer who went well above, well past his comfort zone just to see if he could do it and what it came out to be. And evidently it's a fantastic book. But how far did you go when you were writing that scene and either said, no, that's not enough, let's put a little bit more into it, or you know what, that's too much, I got to back off a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it really does depend on the genre that you're writing. If you know your audience, and know your audience currently and know your audience in the future as well. I did not write incredibly graphic stuff, but it certainly isn't a cozy, where everything happens off the page. I mean, what's going on, but you might see the blade disappear into the gut. You might see that. You might see the blood, coming out. But it's not pages and pages of it. It's not the paragraphs and paragraphs of it. It's the knife goes in, they're dead, very, very quickly with that. And I have to say that I did get to know after the first book came out, I did get to know my readers a little bit more. And I could tell that my readers were often first-time readers of thrillers. They were not a thriller audience, but they were more traditional mystery and some romance. So that as I got to know my audience and my readers, I realized that I really couldn't push the boundaries too much with them. So I scaled it back a little bit as far as the actual gore was concerned. And it wasn't, I have to say, it's not gore. I mean,
Right.
right.
What were some of the comments that you got? Either we want more, or yeah, no, that was too much. What were some of the
Oh, they would
comments?
say oh, that scene, oh, that was so awful. And I'm thinking, awesome, I'm thinking I just had you emote, I just had you from a cold black and white page. I just had you sweat and get worried and clutch your pearls, To me, that's like a win. But I realized that that my audience for what I knew was going to be a 3-book piece, by that point, that I knew I had to scale it back. What was interesting is that the more I wrote about Jessica Wyeth, the more real she became to me, and the less bad stuff I wanted to happen to her. so that was not, I definitely did something really bad to her in book 3, which happened to do with, using real events and the Olympics, the 1996 Olympics down in Atlanta, where they had the bombing. That features into, book 3 very heavily. So I realized that I had to put her at the bombing, and I had to, she was impacted. She got bombed. Spoiler alert. Oh well. But what was it? So as I got to know my readers, I did scale back a little bit on some of that graphic stuff, but I also amped up what I knew that they loved, and they loved the settings. They loved learning about horses in a very real way. They loved learning, that's one thing. I've had reviews in Chronicle of the Horse, Massachusetts Horse, Equine Today, some of the other big horse journals. And one thing that comes through, Horse Nation, Eventing Nation, that type of thing. One thing that comes through with these, very, very persnickety, if you want to say, very exacting reviewers of these books, was that they loved reading a horse book that was not a horse book. That was number one. It's, it's a thriller with an equine element. But then when I write about the equine, the horse piece of it, they will unanimously say, Hambley knows her horse stuff. This was not some contrite, besotted teen writing about the beautiful horse in the field. I mean, this was real life. This is, this is what it smells like, feels like. This is what it's like. This is what a steeplechase is like. This is what you're thinking when you're going over a 6-foot jump, And they said it's obvious that I was an equestrian because I could bring those things to life in a very real way.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you write because most writers write because they want to write. They love to write. They love books. But you also write, you write books to sell them and to make a little bit of money. So are you ever conflicted, though, when you have to restrict, or you feel you need to restrict yourself to your audience for some of those scenes versus just wanting to go where you want to go with this, but knowing that your audience may not, you may lose some of the audience, but then again, you may gain some.
Do I ever restrict myself? I have to say that the hardest thing about writing this book, these 3 books, was keeping the story contained. So yeah, I did want to go off and I did want to explore other characters, and I did want to explore how this character is going to impact another event, or how this discovery is going to impact, change the trajectory of the story. I did have to keep it, I didn't want it to be some freewheeling, forevermore story. I wanted it to be, a linear story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's true, like inside a book, you have one big narrative arc, what instigating event, and then the resolution of that event. But then inside of that, you have all of these little, little mysteries, little arcs, little, narratives that propel your story. Okay, so that's terrific. Well, between the charity, the troubles, and the wake, it too has one big narrative arc, that, one big story of identity, what is family, who is family, what is right, what is wrong, what is a passionate and true cause. What's the right, if you're passionate about a cause and you feel powerless, what do you do? What are the right acts? All of those questions are within that same narrative arc. And then each book has its own, trajectory along that path.
I guess more specifically, though, some of the more troubling scenes, like you said, you got these comments like, oh, that's great because you got the emotion that you were, I guess, kind of driving for. But when it comes down to writing to write versus writing to sell.
Yeah.
Do you, because you want to obviously keep your readership who love your books, and but at the same time, writers, I assume you always want to keep striving to kind of push yourself and see what you can, but you butt up against that conflict of readership versus how I really want this to be like.
Yeah, I have to say, I do not write to sell, because I truly believe that if I mean, I'm an avid reader, and if I'm writing something that I love reading, then other people are going to feel the same way. So I don't write to market. I know that my books have found their readership and found their niche. And writing for my own passion versus writing for market means that it's a much more enjoyable experience for me. It's really fun. And I have to say that in the midst of writing longer novels, I also write short stories, which you see in my bookshelf behind me. So, and then, the short stories are a wonderful creative burst, that is, very tiny footprint on all of that. And a totally different trajectory on, writing to market. It is a great way just to say, oh, I have this idea, I need to write it down. And I did that with a book called, with a short story called The Soul Changer's Confession, that was published in July 2020 by Running Wild Press. And I was very excited when it got nominated for a Pushcart Prize. So, that to me was like, great. And totally different world, totally, different, totally different world than what I was used to. But with, one thing that I get asked about, when I say that I write for me, and I think that you're going to find a lot of authors say this, a lot of them comes out on the page whether they intended to or not. So for example, I'm a lawyer by background. I have, strong equestrian skills. All of these. I'm Irish, part Irish, at least, descent. And those things come through in your writing. So in each book too, in each book as well, there's the plot hinges on a legal question, a legal issue. And then it's in book one, there was a murder, and then how do you prove the guilt of a murderer, X years later? What's the physical evidence that was needed? What do you need for that? So I was able to, really sharpen the legal scenes, because I knew what had to happen and how do you find this evidence and what happens. And, so that helps propel the story. And again, I'm writing for me, because it's kind of like, well, this is kind of cool. I wonder what did happen. And so I know my readers are going to like that too. And then, and then there's a question of, the main character, little bit of a spoiler. I'm trying to think if I should say, yeah, what the heck, that she realizes that, the parents she grew up with, her mom and dad, weren't her mom and dad. So in book two, it's the discovery of who were her parents and why did they give her away? That to me was like, whoa, that's a truly compelling question. And then in book three, it's coming back. She finally realizes that, she was, spirited away as an infant. Why would a parent do that? What's going on there? But then it becomes the question of, well, hey, she was never formally adopted. So is she an American citizen? Is she afforded the rights and obligations and protections that an American citizen would have? So, and what happens to inheritance rights? If you're not who you say you are, then what happens then? So I found, granted, these might be, I have a buddy here. Oh, this is, by the way, this is Dublin. Little Irish thing going on there. So this is Dublin. Anyway, so those questions were fascinating to me. And if they're interesting to me, and when I was describing this, infant being raised by others and not adopted, and what happens to all these, and I could see you go, oh yeah, I never thought of that, and that's what I want my readers to understand. And what was fun about that is when you begin to scratch the surface of these questions, then you realize, ooh, inheritance rights. Gee, I wonder if there's somebody who would want that inheritance and who could now be my antagonist. So it these legal questions then, allow you to create these other characters to kind of just really make your main character's life just miserable, which is what you're trying to do,
Now, I don't know if this is what was considered a non sequitur, but I'm looking at the horns behind and to your right that are on the wall, and it reminded me of the movie Mary Poppins when they were the cartoon part and they were blowing the horns in the fox hunt
Yeah,
scene.
that's what they are.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what these are. These
So
are actual fox hunt horns. The two smaller ones are, and the largest one is not a genuine horn, but the two small ones are.
so did you, when you were over in Ireland, did you ever go on a fox hunt, or is
No,
that
I
something
did
that you
not.
would?
Not in Ireland. Not in Ireland. But the what I did growing up was something called hunter pace. And as I said, a hunter pace is a cross country course, very similar to a steeplechase, but kind of a steeplechase is like a hunter pace on steroids. So a hunter pace is a little bit more genteel and whatnot. So I did a hunter pace as well as what's called a drag. And what they do with a drag is that they put a scent on a rag, and then someone drags that scent, over hill and dale, and then they let the hounds out to follow that scent, and then the horses follow the hounds. So no little foxes are harmed in the enjoyment
Okay.
of the riders, but they will do a drag. Mhm.
Did you ever play polo?
I have swung a polo stick and kind of done a chucker, but I can't say I've ever played in a game. But I have ridden polo ponies. I have done the mallets. I've, done a mock chucker, but nothing.
Okay. So back to the books.
And I know you're just asking these questions for your wife.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. No, actually, it was, yeah. So, like I had mentioned earlier, you have terrorism, you have organized crime, you've got the whole IRA thing going, geopolitical warfare. So, how much? Well, then, uh, uh, this girl's rights, as far as U.S. citizen, not inheritance rights, things like that. How much was based? How much of it is based on your law degree, law knowledge, versus how much you had to research?
Hmm. Well, any good lawyer will tell you that even if they think they know the answer, they're going to look it up again and make sure.
'Cause I know you talk to people about the IRA and stuff, and you talk to people about what was going on. How much did you have to do as far as researching terrorism for certain sections of your book, or the
Oh,
organized
I
crime
did.
aspect?
Oh, I did. I did a lot. I did a lot of research on terrorism. Mostly, what's interesting about this, mostly about the psychological underpinnings of terrorism, what brings people to that point. Because, so for example, we're learning now about, good, solid citizens who are being radicalized and are doing things that they never dreamed of doing. What brings them along those lines to become radicalized so that a good church going citizen drops a bomb in a waste paper basket. I mean, that to me is like, whoa, what happened to this person? And what's interesting is that the charity was one of two fiction books. And at the time, it was the first fiction book to ever be posted, to ever be recommended as readings for security. There was a website, security, and I think it was like securityinfo.net or something along those lines. And the individual, the proprietor, if you say, of the website read my book and said, oh my God, you get the underpinnings, the psychological underpinnings of terrorism just right. What is it about being passionate about a cause that brings people along the lines to, kill someone, to drop a bomb in a garbage pail, to to sabotage an airline? What is it that brings them to that? And it is a talk about, and it does describe, powerlessness, the powerlessness of an individual, and how that powerlessness against, the United Kingdom, how, what does the little guy do to fight against Goliath? What tools do they have in order to be heard? So I wanted to make sure that I wrote books actually, that bring that passion to life, So you have a character that Michael, and when you get to know him, you think he's just such a great guy. He is so passionate. He's on the right side of everything. When you meet him, he's a sheriff, and he meets Jessica and he's like, oh, I like this Jessica person. But then all of a sudden realizes that, she's an accused murderer on the run. So he's wondering, is she a good guy or a bad guy? But then as you get to know Michael, you're like, wow, this guy's really solid. But then you get into book 2 and you're like, wait a second. Is he as solid as I thought he was? Who's his father? What's his story? And then it gets into book 3, and all of a sudden now you have a competing love interest that you don't know whether is a good guy or a bad guy. So now, not only do I have suspense and thriller and those normal plot propulsion issues, but I also have a romance going on. And people want to know, are they going to hook up or not? They just want to know.
It's funny when that you mentioned the bad guy, good girl, or whatever, and the bad person, good person meeting up, romance. Um, the series we did, the fantasy romance February one that we did, I still follow their Facebook page there, and actually somebody was talking about, asked the question, what are your favorite romance tropes?
Oh.
And that was actually one of them. Somebody, actually a couple of people commented on that post that they love the bad guy, good girl, or opposite, the evil, the good, battling against each other, but then end up romantically falling in love, and sort of like that. Um, do you try to stay away from a lot of the mystery tropes and stuff when you're writing, or is that part of the 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 part of mystery is that you want to um have those elements in, so what I'm saying?
Right. I do know what you're saying. First off, I think any good writer tries to stay away from tropes. They try to take a fresh take on a trope. The bad guy, good girl, trope. Well, you really need to flesh out that dynamic so it's not stale, so that it's yours, so that it's fresh. So you really do want to stay away from those tropes. But there are many, particularly romance, or sometimes with cozy writers, they like those tropes in a sense because they're able to fast forward. They're able to devour a book a day. So that's one level of answering that question. And then the other level of answering that question, although you do want to stay away from tropes, I very much like to use innate bias to my favor. So for example, if I'm talking about, if I'm introducing a character and I describe them in physically kind of repulsive way, well, obviously that reader is going to be immediately biased against that character. So I've kind of created this trope of bad guy, good guy, piece to it. But then I use that. I use that to have them question, let the reader be an active participant in questioning their own bias. Gee, they said that this person grew up on the wrong side of town, but what does it say about the reader that they're thinking that?
Mhm.
Does that, if that makes sense? So
Yep.
yeah, there are tropes, and I definitely try to use bias to my advantage when I'm writing, because it
but not
helps shorthand. It helps shorthand what's going on as well.
but not necessarily to use it as a quick fix to.
No, it's definitely not a quick fix.
No.
It's definitely not. No, in fact, when you dip your toes into that water, you damn well better make sure you're good. You damn well better make sure you're not putting yourself too much at risk at that.
Right, right. So when you write a technical part, so something about terrorism or the IRA, or even just using a gun, or you mentioned a bomb in a basket, or in a wastebasket or something. When you get to that part, um, and you're finished with it, you're happy with it, done your own editing and stuff. do you use a beta reader specific for that type of thing, or do you just sort of use beta readers as a general look at the whole book thing,
I
or
have
both?
beta. Yeah, that's a good question. I have beta readers at a couple of points throughout the process. Um, uh, when I think that I've gotten my story pretty well encapsulated, and basically my first draft is done. I've gone through it a couple of times. I've kind of tightened up, questions, and I'm like, okay, all right, let's see how this flies. So I have what I call my rough cut beta readers, and what they're doing is they're saying, yes, yes, there's a story here. I followed your whole line of thinking. I can see the red, what you were trying to do. So they kind of help me on the overall structure of it. And then also, if they come to me and they say, I totally didn't get this character, I totally didn't understand that, I know that my rough cut, betas, if they don't get it, nobody else will either. So then after I do that, that first pass of my beta readers, I go back, retrench based on their comments. And by this point, my work is probably chilled to me by a couple of months, probably. So when I'm going back into it, I'm kind of fresh in it too. So that I'm able to read their comments and say, oh yeah, I can totally see that. And then it's just, combing through and editing. And when I get it to a point that I can read, I set it aside. And when I pick it up again in a week or 2 weeks later, if I get it to a point where I can read that book and not make any more changes. This is not line edits, but this is, not make any more changes. Then I put it out to my bigger stable of beta readers, who then take a much more, stringent view and really get into the dialogue. I don't think that this dialogue rings true for that character. I don't think that they'd be saying it this way. I think it's something else. And these are, writer groups that you use, etc. And then after you take back that feedback, then you can get it into, bring it, make sure you bring it to your editor, your paid editor, and make sure that they go through when they do their line edits and their proofing, etc. And then it's, ready for, that's Dublin. There you go. And then you get it for submission to agents and publishers.
So you I don't know if this was a horse reference or just or a Freudian slip, I guess. I don't know, but you said they're your bigger stable of readers. So
Little,
are you calling your second line a bunch of horses or something, or I don't know?
yeah, my stable of betas.
Stable of
Yes,
betas.
they're Palominos, they're Appaloosas, they're thoroughbreds Arabs. What can I
There you
say?
go. There you
What
go.
can I say?
So last night when we were talking to Leslie, she mentioned that she reads her books out loud to see how they sound. And her Rattlesnake Hill is in audiobook form, just came out
Right?
yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
Um, and as she was listening to somebody else read it, she realized that, okay, she used this phrase a little too much, or maybe this could have been a little different here, certain choice words. Do you do that? Because you say you read it over, and especially after that cooling period, when you go back to it, do you read it out loud to yourself? Do you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I read passages out loud to myself. Um, I absolutely do that. And, a writer's work is never done. I can pick up one of my, published short stories and read it over again and go, oh, I wouldn't say it that way at the same time. So I do think that one of the hardest things to do, I love the editing process. I love that whole revision process. I think cold draft writing is hell. But I do like the revision process, and I do think it's hard for authors to determine when work is done. um, I do think it's hard for writers to say, okay, I'm done here, which is kind of why it's great that you can give it to your agent or your publisher and say, you know, I don't want to see this again. No, you're really not saying that, but anyway, it is it's like being a mom. You never stop being an author. You never stop being a writer because you're always chewing on things.
did you ever chew on taking some of your short stories and rewriting them now, having three big novels, um, or even just taking one short story and making it into another just standalone or the beginning of another
Yes,
series?
yes, 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 absolutely. In fact, one short story that was in Windward did have a therapeutic writing, equestrian aspect, the human trafficking aspect. And as I had mentioned before, that was my volunteering, and I thought, this is cool. So I did write a whole novel that is right now on submission, based on that story. And then the short story that I had nominated for Pushcart was actually more inspired by real life. And I'm writing a nonfiction aspect of that on elder financial abuse and exploitation. So it's nonfiction, a very different world. But for my fiction pieces, I have to say that you know I'm I'm really proud of the Jessica trilogy, and what you see behind me underneath the horns that you had mentioned. Those are the awards that they've received. The two of those trophies are the awards that the Wake and the Troubles received at the EQUUS Film Festival. And the other two larger courses, those were trophies I had received from one of the events I did when I was younger. So
How difficult was it to transition from fiction, where you can take a lot of liberty in portraying things? You do your research too, but you can still take liberties in doing stuff, versus having to write a nonfiction where everything has to be correct.
right. Well, as you said in my introduction, part of my writing life was writing for Bloomberg Business Week. So my first professional writing was journalistic. Where I would inhale information and exhale an article, and on catchy little subjects like angiogenesis, the China pharmaceutical talent. I mean, wow, really fun stuff. So I would inhale information and exhale, an article, and it all had to be very fact-based. But then when I could inhale information and exhale whatever I damned well pleased, I was like, man, I'm not going back to that journal stuff. I'm having way too much fun with this, you know. But the research never goes away, and you always want to be as true and as accurate as you can be. And I have to say that the nonfiction one that I'm writing now, I am excruciatingly detailed on making sure everything is just well researched and right on target, and like I'm dancing on the head of a pin.
Mhm. So in your trilogy, you obviously have Jessica and some of the characters moving throughout the different books. Have you ever had a character, or written a character that you, other than your main characters, you just loved the way you wrote this character, but
Oh,
this character has to die? Um, how did you emotionally deal with that when it came time to writing it? And then, did you have a character that you just wanted to kill because it was just a pain in that character, but you find that you gotta keep going with that character?
yeah. No, I hear you on that. First off, I do have readers. I would get readers emails at time stamped at 2 in the morning that would say, "I'm still awake because of you. I hope you're happy." And they're like, "Yeah, still awake because of you. I hope you're happy." And I'm thinking, "Heck yes, I am happy." You can't put my book down. Yeah, yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that. So and then I had one reader tell me the story that she was in front of a public bulletin board, and it said, moving sale, furniture for sale. And she goes, "Oh, I know someone who needs that." And she tore off that, how they
Yep.
have the phone numbers, and she tore off a little thing. And she was walking away, and she goes, "Oh my God, no, that was that character I just read in Connie's book. It wasn't a real person." So the fact, I'm watching my cat
Yeah.
jump around. And for the readers who are just joining us, this is Dublin. So Ireland is always filled with surprises with that. Um, anyway, so for me to have my readers feel that my characters are so vibrant and real to them that they're actually tearing off little buck slips, for furniture for sale for my characters, I know I'm doing something right. But then to answer your question about, I can't wait to knock one of these guys off. I've never created a character with the intent on killing that particular character. I never created a character with the intent of saying this guy's going to die. But as the character develops, I realize they gotta go. This is just gotta go. So I and I wrote one character right at the beginning of right at the very beginning of the Troubles, that I later found out was on the autism spectrum. I mean, so as you're writing this character, you realize, oh, this is different. This character, I need something else for this character. So so that was interesting. And I did have sensitivity readers for the autism character to make sure that I wasn't, playing into biases or tropes, or that I was compassionate,
Stereotypes or something. Yeah.
right. Mm-hmm.
Did you have a surprise with the comments from your readers? Did you have a character that kind of surprised you, was so that people liked so much, and it was just sort of a side character that really didn't do much. It had a little bit of a presentation,
Oh yeah.
an
Oh yeah.
appearance, but you really weren't going to do anything with it. But then, wow, you got so
Yes,
much
I
feedback
have to
about that
say
one.
that in the second book, I had a British tabloid reporter, Dally Thorpe, and she was just so much fun to write, and I had no idea where she was going to go. But she just was. She was completely inept. She was just absolute screw up. She'd eat her ham and pickle sandwiches, and she thought she was Mata Hari. I mean, it was just fun and just really silly to not. She wasn't a silly character, but she was a really fun character. But she was also a great fly in the ointment because you didn't know what she was going to do. You knew, oh my God, she just got a piece of that information that could blow this whole, scheme up. Is she going to do it? Does she know what she has? Does she know she's sitting on a keg of dynamite with this information or not? And then she's a tabloid journalist, so if she does burst forth with this great information, is anybody going to believe her? So that those are the kinds of tropes that I kind of play with and have fun with.
So I do. We have a few minutes left. I do want to get to this. You are a big part of the Mystery Writers of America, and definitely the Sisters in Crime New England. We've had you participate in some of the panels at our store and online and stuff, which hopefully we'll be able to do again. We're trying to set something up with Leslie.
Oh,
How did you get involved with them? Was that before or after you started writing?
Well, I'm a media past president of Sisters in Crime New England, so I'm still on the board in a kind of a advisory capacity at this point. But I started to write. My first book was published, and then I realized that it's not just reaching out to readers. Writing is so solitary. You really need a community around you. So writing organizations in general are just lifeblood. So Sisters in Crime New England and Mystery Writers of America are two really supportive, powerful organizations for writers. Absolutely.
Yeah, they and of course Sisters in Crime is also I've heard the term Misters in Crime as well. There's some great
Sisters
male
and Misters,
authors
yes.
as well. And you're also I believe it was the head of, you are or were the head of the, I keep wanting to call it clam bake, but it's crime bake.
Yes, I am co-chair to New England Crime Bake, and and I'm currently that and will be for another year or so. And New England Crime Bake is a 3-day writers conference for crime and mystery writers, authors, and fans. And it turns out it's a small conference. We limit it to, well, in the past, it's been limited to 200 people, but now Governor Baker says we're limited to, fewer than that. Um, and who knows, maybe we'll, have a full complement coming up in November. But it is a 3-day event. We cap the number of people who attend, and that's because it really fosters a very intimate, and engaging experience. You've got New York Times best-selling authors. You've got people, with an idea in their heart. You have, fans who have read, every 30 something books of, written by another author. You have authors whose books have been made into movies, or, they just got their screenplay deal. And then you have, your librarians and fans. It's really, and everybody's there because they love each other, and they love, mystery and crime. It's just a lot of fun. So it's a really wonderful event, and we're working hard on making sure that last year was canceled. Well, we did an online event, which you can see at um, New England Crime Bake. Go onto our YouTube channel, and you can see the panels that we had. It was very scaled down, and you can see some of the videos that we put together that we celebrate. Al Blanchard Award for short stories, the Debutante Author Awards for people who are having their first book published. So you can go onto the YouTube channel and check out some of those videos that are great. And there's a great video there about, what is crime bake and what makes it great. And one question that they ask in the video of the different crime authors is, what's your favorite way to kill people?
Hmm.
I love that one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good.
So so if it's in person, how would somebody sign up? Like if I wanted to try to attend, is it like a first come first served sign up thing, or is
Well,
it
there's
invitation
always been a wait
only?
list.
Or
It's always been sold out. There is always a wait list. But if you go on to crimebake.org, there will be an update in the next few weeks about when registration is going to open. And so we say the date that it's going to open, and we're usually sold out in about 48 hours.
wow. Because when she Leslie mentioned it last night, all I could think of was a bunch of writers and authors, fans and stuff getting together on like the Vineyard or Cape Cod or somewhere on the pier in Boston, with these big spreads of lobster and steamers and corn on the cob, big clam bake type thing, but just milling around. But it sounds like fun. I would love to start going to conventions and stuff and meeting new
Oh
authors.
yeah, you should. I mean, especially as a bookseller, you make invaluable contacts there. And all of these events, as well, I mean, all of these events live on. You get your picture taken, you put it up on social media, it connects you. It's a really, New England Crime Bake is known as a premier writers conference that is known for its quality networking.
And we have one. The booksellers have one. It's called Winter Institute, and it's typically in a warmer state, but it's in February. And I actually got a scholarship to go. And of course, we'd have to pay for my wife to go. But then all of a sudden, we had the option to buy the building that we're in, and so I had to give that up because obviously the money we would spend had to go to that. But of course, that fell through. But of course, my luck, it was in like Cincinnati or something in the middle of February. Actually, it was Baltimore. It was Baltimore, and it was like the year before it was like in Albuquerque, and by the time it was in San Diego the year before that, and of course the year that I would have the chance to go was in Baltimore. But great city though, by the way, in the summertime. So
Sure.
the last couple minutes, you did mention those who have their books turned into movies. Now, everybody I've interviewed, I've asked this question. Of course, everybody has said yes. would you love to see your books, your series, as a standalone movie, one big, say 2.5 hour big blockbuster movie for encompassing all three, uh, a series of movies, like the Star Wars series, each book is a 2 hour
Yeah,
movie, or
yeah.
more of a like the Handmaid's Tale, where it's on Netflix and it just keeps getting strung out week after week after week.
Yeah, I definitely, this would not be a single movie. This would be like a Netflix series. Probably like 7 episodes. I could see, if I were to restructure my book, I would break it up into seven smaller books, rather than three. So I would definitely say a series, seven-part series.
Who would you like to portray? What actors, actresses would you?
Well, initially Jessica Wyeth. I had thought that would be like a Gwyneth Paltrow. She had done some really meaty parts early in her career, that I thought she would be a really great fit for. But now she's gone into Goop and stuff, so no, I don't. That's not going to work. I've thought about that, and then
What about
and
like
then
Jennifer Lawrence?
pardon.
What about Jennifer Lawrence?
Oh, see, I would definitely consider her.
Okay.
Absolutely, I would consider her. Yep, that would be great. If she would consider me, I would consider her. And then as far as the male leads for Michael Connett, um, I don't know, man. He's a dark Irish, black hair, piercing blue eyes. I I forget the actor's name. And then there's Declan Cleary, another Irish heartthrob that comes out in book 3. So I don't know. I should have had those names ready for me.
What about the quirky British journalist?
Oh, the quirky British journalist. Well, you can just imagine who she is. She's very narrow face and very skinny, and she wears like pink cardigan sweaters, and she's got kind of a hook nose. She's just not attractive, and she's got, the British aren't known for their great teeth, a lot of them, so you just have this, I don't know. Again, you're stumping me on this stuff. I should have had somebody. I should have had some names for you.
What about audiobooks? Are you looking forward to? Is there something in the works to have at least
I would not
audiobooks and
do
audiobooks?
these three books on audiobooks would be like, way too long, I think, for an average audiobook. And I'm looking into it. But at this point, I have no plans to convert those to audio.
There was one book that I was looking at. We partnered with a company called Libro.fm. They give portion of the sales to us, and you can get to them through our link on our website. But I was looking, just kind of searching through their library, and there was one book, and I wish I could remember. Oh, it was Les Miserables, and it was like 60 hours. So now that's a long book.
That's a long book. That's a long book. So, yeah, each of these books would be like, yeah, it was, when I timed it out for word count and whatnot, and it was almost 50 hours, and that was just,
Wow.
That's just way no.
Is that for all three combined, or is that just for the first one?
Well, it was, I think it was for all three combined. Anyway. But
So
no, I don't have any plans to do that.
15.
I'm onto different, different series and different
Right.
writing, so I haven't circled back to these guys.
Well, if you do, remember Libro FM. So with that, we are out of time. But I would like to thank everybody who joined us on Zoom, and there's been a few on Facebook. Connie's books are available in store. Signed copies are available in store. You can get them through the website, and you can either ship them to you, or you can have select in-store pickup. If you like, you can also get unsigned copies through bookshop.org. And of course, you can always get them straight from Connie as well. Yes? No?
Yes, you can.
Yep.
Yes, you can. You can go on to my website, ConnieJohnsonHambley.com, And so you can, catch up on my latest appearances, etc. there. And then also I have a contact page on my website. And and what I offer to your audience here, Chris, that if they buy your book and they want to have a book club, a Skyped book club, a Zoom book club, and we're soon maybe to get back into person. We're regional to one another. We're close enough that I would be happy to have a book club and event privately for people to sit down and talk about my books.
Cool, cool. And of course, if you're out of state and you want to support your own local bookstore, go to indiebound.org and search for the your closest bookstore that will have her book. So, with that, thank you, Connie. Especially
Oh, it's
thank
been
you
my pleasure.
for being a part of this. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to hopefully either having you on one of the panels virtually this summer, or eventually in person, regardless on a panel or just by yourself.
That's awesome. I look forward to it, Chris, and thanks so much. And good luck with Free Thinkers Corner. It is an awesome little bookstore. It really is. It's just a gem. And it's serving the needs of a community. And I wish you every success with it.
Right. Well, thank you very much.